ahead and turn your video. So you will show up in the sidebar potentially. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's do that. All right. Oh, yay. And it didn't put everything the bar right in front of my thing that I was reading. So that is good because normally it puts everything right in front of the screen I'm sharing. Okay. Everybody can see it okay? Okay. So I gave you the stuff that's happening in IGS through June, so you can take a look at that, or you can go to the website to see more details. I'm not going to run through those, but there's some nice things in person happening. If you have any jewelry, please look for that for more details and when to bring that over. So we are going to go ahead and look at finishing out the last chapter of Writing a Non-Boring Family History by Hazel Edwards. And so this chapter is focusing more on making it more engaging. So how can you tell more interesting stories? One of the things that I think, especially as genealogists, we get stuck at, always wanting to go chronologically. And you don't always have to start at the beginning. So you may want to do something a little bit different. So she actually suggests a flashback. And I think that is a pretty hard one to pull off well. But there are things that you can do that can be that kind of a generational link. So if you can begin in something with present day and then kind of use something to link that to something else that's happening. So using a photo, a memento, a ritual, personal characteristic, a letter, or even a grave headstone might be able to do that. So once you've presented this in the current day, you can then flash back to something comparable in your ancestor's life. So the book that the example that she gave in the book was, today my 21-year-old son left home to backpack around outback Australia. Today, I also received from Scotland a parcel containing letters and photos of my father, who died in the early 60s on the 1st of April, 1970 in Australia. He had left Scotland at the age of 22 and never returned. So she is using the author was using the fact that his son left on a trip around the outback of Australia to the fact that his father immigrated from Scotland to Australia as well. And he had written some letters sporadically, and now he's going to you can discuss those letters and include more of his life information. So, in that example, the personal approach is adopted with the narrator being involved. And so this is going to be a more first person narrative versus that third person narrative that we've talked about in the past. So kind of figuring out how you want to have that narrative also does that, will also impact how you write your stories. In a form of flashback, where the author takes the reader back to a period or a personality from the past, but is also making a statement about the present and maybe the future. Hopefully her son comes back, but maybe he's gone on this trip, and then it's a little easier to move around now than it was in the early 60s or in the early 1900s. Then, like she goes on, is like after this introduction, the author would probably go back to early life or of her father and filling in dates, locations, extended family, all of that biographical information. And it could be in chronological, or it could alternate between generations. Again, I think you just have to be careful in how you're mapping that out so that it is logical, and that you don't lose people if you're jumping from generation 1 to generation 3 to generation 2 to generation 3 to generation 1, and you're just kind of hopping all over. There needs to still be some of that cohesiveness to it. The selections of abstracts would need to have, a structural period, since the parallel between the grandfather and the grandson was drawn at the beginning. The history ending then should revisit the same theme of, wondering about the, his son or his father sent letters back to his family in Scotland? Is his son going to email or blog or do some sort of communication while he's backpacking around the outback? Uh, she suggested another way of using letters is to link, would be to quote relevant excerpts from them or use the original handwriting as a collage at the end of the paper, as end papers of the book. You can contrast a photo of a young backpacker with a sepia photo of a young Scottish man 2 generations before, and kind of contrast and do that. I do think that doing a flashback is one of the more challenging writing tools as a genealogist, where you're doing more fact-based stuff. I think that it's a lot easier to do that in a fictional story than it is in a non-fictional story. If anyone has seen anything about Project Hail Mary, it's a book, and it's a movie going on right now. That is actually, I'm currently listening to an audiobook, so I was thinking about it as I was preparing here. They use flashbacks all the time, and part of it is that so he's in space, and when he wakes up from a coma, he doesn't remember things, and so then he's having these flashbacks of what happened in the 7 years previous of what was going on. So I think flashbacks work really well in that situation, but it's a little harder when you're talking about facts and things like that, as opposed to a character who has some memory loss, right? So if you want to do that, you just have to be careful and make it logical. The other thing you can do is think about how you're starting your openings, okay? And so trying to have something that is more descriptive. So instead of just going, so-and-so was born on X and Y Z date, you can go ahead and use things of, more dynamic words like fortunately, unfortunately, luckily, unluckily, unlike, and so on, to try and just start with some interest. So again, avoid trying to do that formula like X was born on Y day to A and B parents to other thing. So other things that I added to is looking at, how can you do other stuff? So one of the techniques that I've used was I looked to find out what the weather was on the day that my grandmother was born. And so instead of just writing that she was born here at this time, I like just before the break of dawn, I, did that. So it's a little bit more interest, but so thinking about researching the history of the town community at that time, at that day and time, was there a hospital? Would this been a home birth? If there were, is this the first child? Were there other siblings? What are you doing with the, 5, 6 other kids if you're having to take a horse-drawn carriage or, a Model T to the hospital? Kind of thinking about and trying to picture what that birth is like might give your story a little bit more depth to it and be more interesting to readers. Thinking about other things that might factor into it. So, what religion did they practice? Were there any religious customs for that religion at that location and time period? So in Czechoslovakia, the tradition was that the child was baptized as soon as, like, shortly after they were born. So within 24 hours, the child was baptized. And usually the father took the baby and walked over to the church, and the mother was not present for the baptism because the father and the godparents were there. So you can use, you can include that information as well. So doing some things like that might be historically accurate that people don't know about. So I gave that as an example of something I've written. Thinking about some naming customs. So, was a person, so different cultures also have different naming cultures. So, was it he was named after the oldest son is named after the father's father, or, whatever those naming cultures are. Adding that can add some different depth. So, and then oftentimes we want to kind of present our research in the way that we found it, but that doesn't always necessarily make logical sense in a narrative component, because sometimes you find a death certificate or a probate record or a land record, and then you don't find the baptismal record until 15 years later, right? And so, trying to think about, the alternatives of how can you, what else can you do, and how do you make it more interesting? One of the things that she talks about and suggests is starting with a question. And so instead of starting with a statement, starting with all of your question words, make sure the type of question and the way it is asked enables you to keep writing that throughout the rest of the book. So you want an open-ended question, which allows you to explore that issue through several chapters potentially. So some of the examples of an open-ended question is, was it a respect for authority expected within the family that led to generations of multiple military service, political involvement, and domestic tyranny by matriarchs? Could there be a humorous gene running through the blank family? At the family blank, at the frequent blank family gatherings, laughter would be loud, practical jokes, horsing around, and downright silliness were common, especially after a few drinks. How did the Z family set up such an empire in only 2 generations and then lose it all? Were they risk takers? They were risk takers, says the defendants. Others claims they were gamblers. So you kind of get the idea of, you can set up a theme by asking a question. Apart from using that opening with a provocative question, it also helps to hint at some conflict. So you have that risk taker versus a gambler. I didn't read the last one, but you have asthma versus a weak chest. And so they're both disabilities and have that motivation to achieve more. So thinking about having sort of a contrasting viewpoint of, when you're reviewing kind of the family legends and family lore, do you have those opposing ideas from family that can add some of that conflict or that suspense? Hopefully somewhere through your writing, you'll be able to then resolve some of that conflict. Thinking about anecdotes, choose a dramatic anecdote. What is the most interesting thing that you've learned about your family member, and start with that and talk about that. So her example was, Isabel was the illegitimate daughter of a Spanish nobleman, or so the family story goes. Certainly her father's identity was kept secret, but she did inherit a considerable sum of money in her early 20s that was thought to come from her father's estate. The female descendants of Isabel like to imagine her romantic ancestry. Several chose very versions of her name for their daughters. So thinking about some of those, where do you have the conflict already in your family's lines that you can then make that into a more interesting story. So some of the things that I kind of thought up are, early divorce. A lot of times it comes from the things that the messy ancestors, because the messy ancestors leave more records and are often more fun to, we think about the scoundrels and the criminals and the those type of individuals, because they're just, they're more fun characters to think about. So, some of those things, the affairs, the crime, but also the adventurer. So, maybe it's the Mark Twain type of a story, adventurer as well, or Sawyer. And then, tragedy. Is there, consecutive tragedy throughout multiple lines? Do we have, someone that's running for political office, or some, other high achieving type of person in your storyline? And was that consistent through multiple lines? Identification it's just begins with the reader that will be able to identify with that distant ancestor. So it might be about something that is similar or something that is a difference. So As a child, like many, I imagined being the descendant of royalty, Russian in this case. That would explain the mystery of my father being unwilling to talk of his childhood or his family. I don't even know the name of how many brothers and sisters he had. The real explanation was much more mundane. So you can kind of, have that, you know, bring those two things together. And, because we all started at some place with probably little knowledge of our family and we had thoughts of different things. Um, we're going on a quest for our ancestors. Once the clues to their lives have been found, you may be uncertain whether you wanted to live with them or not. Some appeal more than others to us. Then there's that disconcerting thought that the dislikable aspects of your ancestors might be passed down. So, that's that part of writing about difficult stories within your family. And whether it's, things that like having slave owning family, or we have that sort of different idealized component of our history sometimes. So kind of thinking about how you can bring that all together into one. um, the family letters, I think some if we're lucky enough, we have some family letters. um, just because there are a family letter doesn't mean that copyright doesn't still apply, if they're from the US, because copyright is implicit. So once you figure out copyright issues, and have gained permission to use them, then how do you decide to use them? So, we're really excited for having original material, but then how do you use it? Because a lot of times letters, especially if it's just correspondence back and forth, it's very much mundane. It's talking about the weather. It's talking about I went to the grocery store or I went to the market. And it's, a lot of times it may not all be that interesting. It could be more so. I mean, if you have a World War II diary, or you have love letters back and forth between a couple when during the war, things like that, you might have more information. So then it comes into how do you use those letters, and or decide what to use. So deciding who wrote them, the person to whom they were written, what's the style of the writing, the appearance of the letter, timing. Was it, again, before a significant date in history? Were they personal kind of love letters, before a wedding, during wartime, things like that? Is the content something that's significant? Is it an unusual viewpoint? Is it more colorful? Were the thoughts well expressed? So you may want to use the full letters, or you may want to just use parts of them. One of the things she does brings up is that if you have your letters that you've selected in your extracts, are you going to transcribe them 100% accurately, or are you going to correct for grammar and spelling and that sort of thing? Her remarks is to transcribe them as is and not correct things, because you want to show exactly. And one of the ways you could do that too is just go ahead and give, show the actual letter, or have a screenshot of the letter and have a transcription below it, so that you have that specific there. And so you want to certainly, if you're doing extracts, you want to emphasize certain aspects of the personality you're portraying. So you don't want to convey the ancestor. So if a lot of times there might be things about money and things, and wages and prices of stuff. And so if you're really focusing on that, your people might think your ancestor was very money conscientious, by concentrating on those things of the prices of wages or foods. Or if you're talking, you might take something else out and it's going to emphasize more of a political or philosophical awareness, if the letters are that rich and have that information. So again, thinking about as you're editing, you might be making editorial choices that actually show your ancestor in one light or another. So you could have it as a more positive light and leave out negative things, or you can put the negative things in and leave out the positives, or you include both of it, but know that you are making an editorial choice if you are doing excerpts on letters. Diaries. She talked about having diaries and thinking about kind of reading between the lines, because often diaries have been kept as an emotional release under times of extreme hardship and through boredom, or it's an attempt to keep some kind of personal perspective. So we want to be careful on, on what we're looking at. So often wards would keep them illegally by serving personnel and sometimes sent home with their effects. Um, the gaps in the dates of entries might need to be researched because, unlike a letter, diaries were usually in place with them. And so, if there's a missing entry, what happened to the author of that? Were they occupied elsewhere? So, if you had a military diary and you had a 3 week gap when they were pretty diligent about writing daily or every other day, what happened in those 3 weeks? It might give you clues of things that you need to research a little bit more. And so some diaries also were written for prosperity because the author was aware of the living, they were living in a significant time period. And so those might be more formal, especially if it's someone of status or rank or occupation. I think a lot of ministers and preachers and early on kept diaries as well. So it might be of their travels and who they saw and who they, where they were at, and potentially, people they baptized and things like that. So you may have that type of thing as well. And so same with a diary or same with a letter, you can do an excerpt could be a block or a text block with, or you can have that original writing on how you decide to illustrate it. So her last section was really about how to write history for kids in a non-boring way. So she discussed again using those anecdotes or those small stories that could change the attitudes of the kids towards history. From your own family, thinking about the extraordinary, as so-called ordinary people also have extraordinary things that happened in their lives. Trying to discern why people did things. So talking about if you had Irish ancestry that came over, and talking about the Irish the potato famine. What were the push-pull factors in why someone migrated, even across the United States. So not only coming from over from Europe, which most of our ancestors have come from, but coming from other locations as well. What were their motives? And you can hypothesize those. Some of them are pretty clear with the potato famine, but there's a lot of push-pull reasons why people migrate, and you can research that information and add that as to, it was probably because, the industrial revolution happened and there was less jobs and there was overcrowding, and so people moved further west or whatever that is. So, results of war, prejudice, loss, climate disaster, things like that. So the newspapers are a great source for those type of things because, the newspapers were one big gossip rag. They still are to a degree. So looking at the newspapers can help you find some of those things as well. And then the other thing for kids is to think outside the box from a conventional book. So depending on the age of the children that you're writing for, maybe it's not going to be really a written book that's heavy on text. Maybe it's more of a picture book, and you're doing a couple of key pictures of this is your grandparents and this is your great grandparents, and maybe you have one book that's grandparents and one or two books that's great grandparents on both sides. Maybe you want to do a short little video, sort of like a TikTok, or you're going to do a short story like on Instagram. What kind of memorabilia can you include for those things? Can you make a short little movie for them? So is there some other format that you can use to help tell that story that they're going to be more in tune to? If you have followed Krista Cohen, she talks about now that she pretty much does most of her stuff as a little vignette type of thing that's about a 2 to 3 minute story, because she's realized that most of her nieces and nephew, they're used to a very short TikTok-y Instagram type of reel. And if you give them something that is, more than a page, they're not going to read it. I think Renee Q also had found she was posting things in a private family Facebook group. And she's like, I can do one picture with about 2 small paragraphs, maybe 3 small paragraphs. And that's when she gets the most engagement with her family. If she did anything longer than that, she kind of lost half her family. So thinking about doing things in little snippets and maybe doing things in a digital fashion that you're delivering it that way, as opposed to doing something that is a 150, 200 page book. And that's the end of the book for that. Anybody have any questions about any of that stuff? Okay. So one of the things that I don't remember who asked me about, but one time when I asked about topics, was doing looking at different text to talk to text options. So I pulled the 3 primary Word documents, word processing document types, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, and then if you use Pages, which is a purely Mac-centric software. They're all very similar on how you do it. It's just locating where to find the dictate, or what they call that. So if you're using Microsoft Word, on the very top bar, when you're in the Home tab, over onto the far right, you're going to find this little dictate button that also has a microphone on it. And so when you want to go ahead and do your text to talk or your talk to text, you're just going to hit the dictate and it'll come on. I'm giving you also the shortcuts, so it gives it for Word and for Mac if you'd rather do quick keys. If you're on the web, it's a slightly different. It's still, I think it is still on the Home tab, and you can click the dictate, but you might not be able to get the quick start on that. And then if you're on a mobile device, you're going to tap on the microphone icon if you're using a tablet or your phone. And the essential voice commands are pretty much the same regardless of which platform you're using or which software you're using. So one of the things that is hard to get used to if you are purely just dictating your story is that you're not going to have any punctuation in anything unless you actually say the word. So when I'm just talking in general, it's not common for me to think in sentence structure and put in periods and commas when I'm just free talking. And that's not going to be picked up. If you just have a hard time typing, but you're better with handwriting and want to then get it into a typed format, then that is a little bit easier for me to dictate with punctuation, because I'll be reading a line and then you're just reading it and your comma. So if I'm going to be talking about the kids, so there was George, comma, Nat, comma, Adolf, comma, and Larry, comma. Or Larry, blah, blah, blah. But, it takes a while to think about dictating with using period, comma, question mark, right parenthesis, left parenthesis, that sort of thing. It's just not a normal thing. So you will have to go back and edit that component. Formatting. So if you're formatting things, you can always say new line. So like if you're using the bullets, anytime you want to have a new line, you just say new line. Or if you want to start a new paragraph, you're going to say new paragraph. If you have corrections, you're just going to say delete or backspace to remove the last word, or undo to remove the whole last part that you've said. That might be a period or a section. So this is specifically, so the essential voice commands are pretty much universal. I think they're pretty much the same on all three systems. This is specifically to Word here that you would use that gear icon in the settings next to dictate. So I don't have it on here, but it comes up when you actually click on dictate. And so you can turn on some auto punctuation if you want to add periods and commas based on your pauses. So that might help you a little bit. And then you can also, if you want to dictate in a different language, you can change the spoken language if you're dictating in something other than English to a different language. You can also have it filter out profanity if you happen to dictate and say some bad words as well. I haven't seen that that's been a problem for me, but anyway. And then it's just some troubleshooting tips. Make sure that you have a stable internet. Make sure you have Microsoft microphone access. You may have to change your privacy security settings if you have not allowed Microsoft access to your microphone. Same, and then with that transcribe feature, if you have an audio recording, you can use the transcribe tool found in the drop down next to the dictate button on the Word for the web. So it doesn't work on your desktop version, but it does work on the Word for the web. Anybody have any questions or thoughts for Microsoft Word for dictation? So Google Docs is going to be in your Google Suite type thing. So if you have a Gmail account, you have access to Google Docs. So it's the Google Docs is called voice typing. And you're going to typically navigate to tools in the menu. So in your top menu up here, your tools is your sixth one in here. So under tools, you're going to go down to voice typing. That's how you find it. So, open up your computer or open up a Google Doc, go to your tools, go down to voice typing, or this is the shortcut for Windows. This is the shortcut for the key shortcut for Mac. And then a microphone box will appear and you can click start. And then again, if you haven't given Google the permission to use your microphone, you're going to have to hit allow. And then this, here's for the mobile component. Again, your voice commands are the same pretty much for both. It's the editing is a little bit different. The edit and navigation, you would say delete. This is the same to move the previous word. You can select word or phrase to highlight text or stop listening to pause the microphone. You can also do formatting for bold, italicize, or apply heading 1 through 6, which you can't do in Word, so they're slightly different. Their tips are having a quiet environment. So if there's a lot of background noise, that can cause some errors, making sure that you have clear speech. And then you may want to fix errors as you go. So Google Doc is going to underline uncertain words in gray so that you can then right click and then fix that as well for you. And it also has a change language, and 100 different languages are supported in Google Docs. And that would apply to all the Google Suite type activity. And then the last one is going to be Pages for Mac, just to be cohesive here. So Pages is just for Macintosh. So if you don't have Macintosh, you can just ignore me for a couple minutes. So it's going to be a built-in is the dictation is also in the under the edit button in your top browser window bar, and down at the very, very bottom is start dictation in Pages. You can also hit the command key twice with F5. So F5, if you have that, have a full keyboard, that will also get your microphone icon. Again, you'll need to enable dictation if you don't already have that set up, and then you're going to start talking. So again, the punctuation is the same. The structure is pretty much the same, but it does have special characters, which is different. So you can put caps on to capitalize the next word, or all caps on for a string of words. You can say smiley face or rocket emoji to add symbols and emojis in there. Um, and then it's giving you some sort of dictation um, ways to um, words are hard tonight apparently, to fix things if you're having troubleshooting. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. You can also turn on auto punctuation like you can in Word, but does not in Google Docs. I don't think it's the auto punctuation option. Yeah, so I don't see the auto punctuation available in Google Docs, so I'd have to look to see if that's in your settings somewhere. I haven't used that on there. And then again, also it has different languages that you can use. So, and that is that. I'm gonna stop sharing. Anybody have any questions about any of those things? All right, then I'm gonna open it up for kind of questions or comments and talk about things that you may want to talk about.
I just wanted to share that I've been following Randy Seaver on his blog, and he's been doing a lot of things with his kids, her grandkids with AI. And there are some tools, AI tools, that he writes up the story and then turns it over to them, and they'll write a poem or they'll make a song. Or I think it's Google LM Notebook that will turn that story into a podcast. And he's been experimenting with that.
Yes, I think it's LM Notebook
Yeah,
LM.
yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out of AI to help you with that um, if you are working with AI.
Mhm.
Yep, I saw Dwayne that you posted something in the chat. Yes, you're welcome. Your microphone is, or you're still muted if you were gonna wanted to say something else, Dwayne.
I know I've heard other genealogists that you on a personal Zoom account, you can do your own recordings and you can automatically get transcripts from that. You have to turn on the closed captioning, but it'll give you a transcript. And kind of what they're doing is some of them are telling those stories they heard from their ancestors, like their grandparents or their aunts and uncles, and they just turn on the video and they just say, my aunt told me this wonderful story, and they're more animated than reading it because they're restating the story kind of the way the aunt did, or they tell a little bit of the background of the cousins that interrupted and told the story, added to the story. And they put a little timer on so that they don't make them too long. But, there are video audio editing tools, but it sounds like they're doing, just hit record, do a recording, stop the recording, and they call it good, and they'll just post it on a family page or share it via their messenger app or whatever. So
Yeah. There's a ton of different ways to do videos and but I mean you could also, because your phone, whether it's iPhone or Android, has a video recording option, right? So you can simply just set your phone up and record into your phone and get a 5 minute little recording that way as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of different options out there of doing a short little video that we didn't used to have. So with that book done, are there ideas or things that you guys are interested in um, me talking about, and like what would benefit you the most as far as topic ideas? So are you guys looking for more tech type ideas? Are you looking for more writing type things?
Stacy, I've liked the writing things that you've done. Um, it helps. I mean, it's like you get an idea and it helps you develop something that you're working on. So, I mean, if we could do more of those, that would be helpful to me.
Any specific writing thoughts, like topics?
Well, I mean, I'm right now I'm trying to gather just more information about I had I'm sure I've mentioned this before. I've had a great grand aunt that actually was blind, and I just discovered that in the last few months, and I've been trying to gather up information about um, kind of what her life might have been like. So, maybe exploring how do you research that, and how do you know what her life might have been like in that time period.
Where
It
does
was
she
like
live?
she lived in Harrison County, Missouri,
Okay.
and um, she lived from 1869 to 1896, I think she does. She was 27, I believe. She was blind, and she did go to the school for the blind in St. Louis for a few years before the end of her life. And I just discovered between today and our last meeting that I found a um, a probate packet from her family in Illinois, which is where they were from before they came to Missouri, where she actually she would have been like 8 years old, I think, when this estate was settled. She received $275, which would have been a pretty substantial amount of money at that time for an 8-year-old. Have no idea what happened to that money. I mean, I'm sure, assuming it went to her parents, but um, and then she had a relative that was receiving money on her behalf from the county, and um, so he was evidently distributing the money. I don't know the details yet. Um, and my next thought was, well, today I received a copy of the probate package. I'd requested that a couple of weeks ago. I just got that today, so I haven't had a chance to look at all of it yet. But it mentioned several other family members, and I'd sort of like to research and see how they all relate. Um, but then also just I'd like to know what would a single blind woman what would her life have been like, in 1890, going from Harrison County, Missouri to St. Louis. I'm assuming it was by train. I don't know how else they would have gotten there. But so I'm going to contact the school and just see if they have any historical documents and that
Yeah,
might explain what that life could have been like.
yeah. I would definitely contact the school and look at that. And but that's even I mean, that's one of those things that I would throw into an AI chat box and go, hey, what would a person in the 1890s that was blind, what would her life look like? And please provide your sources. So then you can then go in and check those sources to get some source information. Because
Okay.
like a Google search doesn't do quite as well. So, and even right now, um, so here, let me share my screen a second. So I just put in, let's see, right in front of my screen. Okay. So I put in Missouri School for the Blind history,
Mhm.
right? And so this is what I got, and it's an AI overview. But if
Yeah.
I go dive deeper into AI mode, I'm just in Google. So this is just going to bring up Google's AI search. So if I just go there, it now gives me a search one. Um, and you can see here, if we want to do text to voice, we can do. So here's, I've got my little microphone, so I can even do that here.
Oh,
Oops. She was born in 1890.
1869. She died in 1896. See, that's the thing. I don't know if she was born blind or if it
Was
developed
blind.
or,
Yeah.
because I don't have any other records of anyone else in the family being blind at all. So,
Right. And so then I'll just see what they've got. So they're searching across the web. So Braille was invented in 1824, and then right here, here's the sources. So if you click on this little icon at the end of the
oh,
statement
okay.
is your sources. So then you can go and look at the sources to find more information. So maybe finger spelling, because that would have been Helen Keller. So sign language, finger spelling type of things. Um, so, and this is, environmental cues, the sounds and smells of the streets, following an identical route. So these, I mean, this is where I would start. Was this is how I use AI for things. And now that it's searching the web, you're getting the sources more. So just about
Okay.
everyone is a dual platform. And so it gives you an idea to start looking for stuff. And so she
Oh,
could have been trained, right? So if she was cognitively intact and just blind, so maybe she was doing sewing, knitting, beadwork type activities. So here's blind weavers,
yeah. I don't know. The only thing I have about her, and I don't, I mean, I guess I could do the same thing that you're doing. There's a just like a news clip, how the local newspapers do, kind of a social commentary. And her parents were in the town of Bethany, and they were showing examples of her writing, which would be, if she's blind, how did she write?
Right. And well, and then again, was she completely blind or was she legally blind? Right.
Yeah.
So, and did they even make a distinguish of that? So, that would be, and she died in 1890s, you said?
1896.
Okay, so even if we have a death certificate, we're probably not going to have extensive cause of death or other ailments or anything like that that's going to give you that type of information
Yeah,
as
I,
far as
I
her
couldn't find that
blindness.
or an obituary, either one.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So 1890s typically didn't give you a lot of information on death certificates.
mhm.
So but this would give you like doing something like this type of a search, and you can be more specific with your questions with more information that you have.
Yeah,
Um, and,
well,
and that's sort of an idea.
that's a good start. Thank you.
Yeah. So I know not everybody's into AI at this point in time, but I think it's here to stay. I don't think it's going away. I think it's still, you just have to use it responsibly, and you have to check it just like any other source that we check or any other fact that we have. So
Yeah,
you can't just blindly trust it, just like I wouldn't blindly trust one document to know that that one document is 100% accurate. I have to check it against something else to compare and go, okay, yeah, these match, and that makes sense.
sure.
There are things that I kind of trusted pretty blindly on, things like when I'm researching and I had a family that, I knew they left because of the Irish potato famine. I was pretty confident the stuff that they told me about the Irish potato famine was going to be correct, right? So if it's something that, is a well researched or well discussed topic, you probably don't have to fact check it quite as much as if you're doing something that's a little less factual, like, or, a little less in depth a topic. So that's my own perspective on it anyway. All right. So what I'm hearing is kind of doing a splattering of both writing type topics and kind of like tech topics. And it's almost of like researching type things of avenues to go through. And that sort of, is that what I'm hearing correctly?
I think so.
Okay. Now, we had talked about writing time. Is that something that people still want and would like find that valuable of having an hour to set aside and do for writing when we're together, or is that less valuable?
Well, I liked it when we did it.
It introduces a little more discipline than you do on your own.
And that's sort of that was the idea, was the writing accountability time of trying to do that. Okay. So I will kind of work on something for May. It might be more tech tools type things because we haven't really done a true tech tools in a while. So, and just talking with the video, maybe I'll come up with some different options on how to do some quick, easy videos besides just, giving like a Zoom. Because if all you've really done is done more of a participate in and not really been the one running the tools, that might be something that way. And then I'll look to see, I've got a book that's called Writing for Story, and looking on my different stuff, and it's craft secrets of dramatic nonfiction. So I have a couple of different writing books. So I'll take a look and see, and we'll probably do that. And then just as sort of a foreshadowing, as those that were here with me at the beginning, I will be out most of the month of August and be gone. So we will not be having a meeting in August. I'm going to just cancel that August meeting while I'm in Asia for like 15, 18 days. So we won't meet in August, but we will meet the rest of the summer. So unless anybody has any questions for me or anything like that, we can go ahead and sign off here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to stop the recording.